Hey there.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I should switch it up this time.
Yeah?
Nah, just keep it the same.
Oh. Okay, great. Don't ever change.
My name is Will.
My name is Kathryn.
And this is Behind the Pixel, the podcast where we try to bridge the knowledge gap between those who buy creative content and those who make it.
Yes.
I'm nailing that line.
You are.
I'm doing
I'm proud
really
of
well. Should tap myself on the back here.
Yeah.
Bridging the knowledge gap. Bridge the knowledge. What are some famous bridges? Do you know some bridges?
I feel like I'm being asked a trivia question. Yes. The Golden Gate Bridge.
How many bridges can you name?
Okay.
Good.
The Golden Gate Bridge.
Yep.
The G Dubs, of course.
Of course.
That's the George Washington Bridge for those who don't know. The bridge to Terabithia.
Nice.
Yes.
The only bridge I know of is like Bridgerton.
Oh, boy.
Or, Bridgestone Tire. Or
Yep.
My favorite, Jeff Bridges.
Boy. Jeff Bridges. Okay. Why don't we build a bridge onto today's topic then?
Ooh, nice.
Nice.
So today's topic is, how do we as animation professionals, quote unquote, determine the costs of animation productions?
Yeah.
Cost
Big
is
question.
a big question. And this is, I think, going to be one of many episodes that we talk about costs in general.
For sure.
Because it's a big topic and there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah.
So understanding cost is a big hurdle for anyone who doesn't do animation production, and even sometimes for ourselves.
Within there, yeah.
So we can't talk about it from all angles. We
Sadly.
have a limited time here. But if you're working with an agency or a marketing firm, we're going to skip those, because those folks, if you're an agency or marketing firm, you're doing way more stuff. You're doing strategy. You're doing something beyond just the production. And so the way they charge might be entirely different. So
right. We can't really speak to how they charge.
Yeah. But where we can help, I think, is if you're someone who is purchasing this outside as an outside help, outsourcing, or going to what we've called in the past the outhouse. If you
keep that joke going
out, meaning that you're working with a creative studio directly, right? You're trying to come to us directly, trying to figure out what we're going to do together here. So let's get into this. So when marketing and communication professionals want to create animated content as part of their larger strategy, typically what we see is they look for referrals, right? They'll go out, they'll ask someone they know, they'll figure out what to do in terms of how to get something done. And what they get back is, they're shopping around, they're doing a little, maybe getting a bunch of estimates from a bunch of different studios, maybe 3 or 4, say. And, something feels off when you look at all those. Right?
Yeah. Like as a marketer, I'm kind of looking at, each line item and I'm like, there's a $2,000 ping pong table that's being charged here. What's that?
Yeah. Well,
yeah. I think the point here that we're making is that the estimates are kind of noticeably different, right? Between them and they're asking for the same request overall. And that means that there's seemingly the same amount of steps required to do that job. So what's happening here? As a result, it really makes it frustrating to kind of know who to actually trust between them as I'm looking around. And it kind of begs the ultimate question here of like, why does the cost of animation vary so much? Why? So whether this is their first project or their 100th project, the problem kind of seems to persist across the industry. And prices might even change for studios over time as they start to grow and scale. So we realize that as a person that is paying for these services, you might not understand what is affected by the cost of an animated production, what goes into it, or how cost connects to what creative tasks are required to complete that work. And there's also costs here that are associated with really the perception of the value that we're providing for that service. Yeah.
I actually just thought of it.
Yeah.
The ping pong table is for research. It's
a
research-based table. Yes.
You're telling me that you're trying to justify that cost of a ping pong table.
I really need to know like how the ball bounces back and forth. Like I can't come up with that on my own. I can't just watch reference footage.
Sure.
I need to play ping pong.
Let me sign that check. So why don't you tell me maybe what are creatives going through here in relation to cost?
Yeah. So from the creative's point of view, I think it's important to highlight the typical hiring structure that we have. One of the most common being the freelancers are hired by creative studios or production companies. You can use those interchangeably in our language, I think. And then businesses hire those folks. And sometimes there's a marketing agency between them. So you have kind of 3 or 4 different entities that are working together on one particular thing. Sometimes, depending. So you might call all of those vendors. If you're a marketing person at a business, you have your list of vendors, approved vendors, and then they have their list of approved vendors, and then we have our list of approved freelancers. So it kind of all cycles that way. So if you're a freelancer working with a creative studio, you have a specific type of problem. You as a creative might be thinking about reevaluating your pricing structure or reevaluating how you price out your work, right? And you might ask yourself some questions. What is a good rate? How do I charge for my services? Is there a magic formula? Does anyone know it? Can they give it to me? What is a healthy balance between my client's needs and my artistic identity, right?
In terms of that cost.
In terms of that cost. If you're a creative studio being hired by a business or a marketing firm or a larger entity, you might also have similar issues when it comes to determining costs.
Right. A lot of those questions I could relate to as a studio.
Exactly. But there's some additional problems that arise when you start to ask them. So do I need to hire out for specific roles, right? Do I need to hire out for specific creative tasks? Or can we achieve everything sort of internally as a studio with the people who we have as employees? Are we also considering any other kinds of costs? Are there managerial costs or directorial costs? Or how much should it cost to provide this sort of structure and guidance to the individual creatives or for the particular marketing firm that we bring on, right? That we take on. So does it also cost any more to align your goals to our creative strategies? There's something around expertise there that also adds an added value, a perceived added value, that you might be thinking about.
Sure, that's fair.
So the other question might be like, what about a disc golf set instead of a ping pong table?
I see. Right.
I'll compromise here.
You're compromising.
I'm just trying to get something, it's been really nice out. So maybe I'm thinking about going outside instead.
More research here, I see.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. All right. Well, why don't we get into our usual structure here? As always, we try to bring up the problem from the point of view of the marketer communications professional and a point of view from a creative. So we assign roles here.
Yeah.
Who are you taking today?
Today I can be the marketer.
Okay.
Let's go with that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I will serve the role of the creative, but marketer, take it away.
Okay. So from the marketer's perspective, we can look at this from sort of 4 different angles if you kind of think about it that way. So there's an emotional standpoint. Let's go there first. Let's talk about our emotions.
Happy to do that.
one of the biggest problems is I don't know if I'm being overcharged as a marketer, right? I am someone who maybe is skeptical, and I don't want to be taken advantage of for especially my lack of knowledge in this realm, right?
That's fair.
Because when I look at these costs, it can create a little bit more confusion than I'm used to. There are more complications there. And then I start to lose trust a little bit in who those people, like, why does this person have this number and why do you have this other number?
So much sports equipment in this
estimate. What are these disc golf sets?
Right.
There's 12 of these now. What is going on? It
just keeps expanding.
On the logical side, maybe I wasn't aware that there's no set standard for charging for these services. That is the truth, by the way. There is no set standard for charging for these services. And there's no pricing like cheat sheet that I can go and look at because everyone's pricing is different. Right. And as a result, I don't know exactly what I'm paying for. Not really. right? So it makes me wonder, where is the value? What am I paying for? Where is this coming from? Mm-hmm. So the third way I think I'm viewing this is sort of for my wants and needs. That's sort of a bucket there. I want to understand animation costs because it will make my life easier, right? Especially if I'm thinking about doing future animations, right? I want to keep doing these things. And I want to understand costs as it relates to my campaign, right? Because this is both for myself. Maybe I'm working for a agency or someone else, another business. Maybe I'm a marketer at an agency and I'm working with a business. My clients and I all kind of see the same thing. Is we calculate value based on the return. It's what am I going to get for the return? What's the return? And that's something that I can concretely calculate, right? I spent this amount of money on animation and I'm getting this much money in return. Mm-hmm. And usually that's what businesses are looking for. That's what marketers are trying to do. So all of this means that I'm not really receiving the information that will help me justify the cost of the project, right? Right. It means I'm feeling I'm taking on more risks, and I don't like taking risks, right? I like to be sure about what I'm going to get. Right. And so, in this case, more risk does not equal more reward.
It could be considered a bit of a, risky business.
Cue the piano. Somebody call Tom Cruise.
Somebody call
Let's
Tom
get our
Cruise.
socks on.
Mr. Cruise. We need you.
We need you, Cruise, to swing in here.
There you go.
So why don't we keep cruising along?
Nice. That's a solid one. I'll give you
that. And we'll go to the creative's point of view.
Sure. Okay. So we're going to talk about this in first. The first perspective here that we're covering is the freelancers that are being hired by those creative studios or production companies. So again, kind of thinking about it from an emotional place to start. Emotionally, I want to provide the best creative possible that I can give to a studio because I want to be able to not only survive in the industry, I want to be able to thrive, especially in a gig economy. And I also realize that my work, if it's done correctly, provides more value to what I make on the project overall. And that all makes sense. So logically, I might try to charge as much as I possibly can because as a freelancer, jobs come and go, right? That's the nature of the business in a way. So I am consistently thinking about where my job is going to come from next and keeping my eye out on my cash flow overall. But even if I charge a market rate here, I understand that the value in the medium of animation, just like art, is pretty subjective, right? It's subjective to the person that's purchasing the project and the person that's creating the project. Right. So all of this puts a strain on what it is that I actually want, which is I want to be able to create endlessly on my own time and my own schedule and get paid for that.
Forever.
What a concept, right? To be able to do that. And so I know I need to keep an eye on my time because the time and expenses are actually the concrete costs, like you were talking about before, that I can actually see and calculate out. So my struggle in this situation is really trying to find a happy balance between my time, my needs, my rates, and my costs overall.
I think a lot of studios can also relate to these feelings as well.
Yeah, for sure.
But there are some slight differences in there in terms of emotions and logic, wants and needs.
Right.
Maybe let's break that down.
For sure. Yeah. So on the studio side, so similar to a freelancer, right? We know there's a ton of value into what goes into making that production, right? And if we're doing it right, our success will dictate your success, Mr. Marketer. So how you define success within your campaign or your other efforts is kind of a whole other question here. And we're going to cover the ROI of animated videos in another episode.
Yeah. We'll kind of walk through how we think about return on our projects. Yeah.
But for now, just thinking about this a little bit further, there's also more value to what we provide as a studio than just that finished product alone, right? Than just the video you're asking us for. It's the experience that you, the client, are going to be getting from us, the knowledge that you gain from us about the industry and about animation, the creative choices that we're making as a studio. and our application of your strategy for the content that you're making. And even on top of that, our approach to developing that content. How do we make it? It's generally our total collaboration here that makes the visuals work for your goals. So we're always thinking about that stuff.
Yeah.
And so logically, that's all happening on sort of the emotional side. Logically, a lot of studios are trying to charge based on the value they believe they're providing to you and your business. And simultaneously, they're also trying to keep their costs lower. That's the nature of business, and it's because they're trying to keep their profits high, just like any business would do. Big profit typically means bigger revenue and lower expenses. Studios, though, might be a bit more open to negotiation on that front because we know that flexibility is required within animation productions. There are lots of creative choices that you can make that reduce the amount of labor required to complete a project, right? So we expect both sides needing to compromise here to find a balance between the value, the cost, and the time overall.
And especially as technology grows and changes,
right?
It allows for some of those things to be actually faster.
Yeah. And so all of this kind of goes actually against what a studio actually wants, which is like a little bit frustrating at times, but it's because a studio wants, similarly to the freelancer, to provide the best creative possible that we can for your project, which means we might actually be seeking more time to work on the project to up the quality. But this can be dependent on many different factors, like how much you actually paid for it. That determines the time a little bit.
Yeah, your budget.
And even how the project is being managed overall. I think at some point we'll get into an episode about project management.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
and we'll actually have someone on to talk about project management.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's safe to say that poorly managed creative projects usually cost everyone more. You hate to see it. It's either in both dollars or like just emotional stress.
That is true.
That's a very real thing. But yeah, so since we're on a schedule, like alongside the other productions, as a studio, we have to keep a watchful eye on our time to make sure that each project is actually viable for us. So, and that's regardless of the length of the production overall. We could be in production for either a week, a month, or even years if it goes down that road. And like you, we're all running a business, right? Let's keep that on the page. We're all running a business. So viability and sustainability means more profitability. And in order for our business to grow, we have to factor profit into the equation. It's just a natural part. Yeah.
Gotta throw it in there.
So a big question here is, how do we make sure that as creatives that we're charging fairly for both our time and for the work requested, right? How do both sides understand and acknowledge all of that for determining what a fair cost should even be, right? But thankfully, not to get everybody sad here, we do have a few solutions to figuring out some of these questions.
The answer to answering those questions is actually to ask more questions to get the right answers.
Oh, well, look at that.
So good.
What a tongue twister. Yes.
So instead of telling you what to expect to pay for animation, here are some common questions we've received from our clients that we'd like to answer here to get your brain juices flowing a little bit.
Sure.
You gotta get those creative juices on.
They do say that, yeah.
So why do costs vary so much across the industry? Here it is. There are many factors. So the first factor that we can think of is the complexity of the project, right? So the tasks required to complete your project are typically dependent on the style requested. The main driver of cost is actually style. A lot of people think of length. They think of other things. It's style.
Can you say it again
Style
one more time
is
for me?
Style is the main driver of cost.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And style is we already talked about, I hate that word. Motion style, visual style. That's how we break it up. There's two different sort of sections of things that you should look at. And those are going to drive what tasks need to happen.
Right.
So there are different steps in a production workflow, all required to produce a different stylistic output. And each of those steps takes a certain amount of time.
Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah. An example is, and I use this a lot with a lot of my calls when I'm doing a sales call and we're talking through a project with someone, a 30-second Pixar style animated film or short or thing, right? Yep. So what do we call Pixar style?
Mhm.
It's 3D. It is typically realistic lights, cameras, shaders, materials, right? It's character animation for the most part. It's driven by character animation, right? And there's probably some custom sound work in there.
Sure.
So all of those things, Pixar style quality, 30 seconds, we're good to go. Now, on the same flip side, if I say, okay, what does it cost to do a 30-second animated text-based typography piece? Okay, well,
I'm picturing, yeah.
That's an entirely different cost. Same length, same 30 seconds. It might even be the same story, to be honest, right? We're still sort of putting out the same message.
Right.
But one's all text and one requires 3D character animation and some other things. And so you could think of that as like same length, different costs, different styles. Right.
For sure.
So that's one. That's one bucket.
Yeah.
The other bucket is talent and experience on the job, right? So are you hiring the top 1% of the industry? Do they have 30 plus years of experience? And that's fine. You can hire the best of the best, but they come at a cost, right? And you can hire the worst of the worst, and they also come at a different cost.
Right.
So it just varies on who you're hiring. And that's a big one. That's a big value add. When you have someone on the team that's had a lot of experience, that's going to drive up costs.
Right.
So did you book Taylor Swift? Or did you book the much lesser known Swift T?
Oh, Swift T,
Yeah.
the tea enthusiast pop singer.
That's right. I think, I don't know if you know their hit song.
No, please tell me.
Yes. I love you so much.
Boy.
Yeah.
That's not good. I feel like a better one would be like game set matcha.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Going back to the tennis and outdoor
Yeah.
activities.
If we're thinking about the sports idea here.
God, Swift T. Okay. Another bucket of things that you should consider here. The scale of the production. How big is the thing? So the more elements, the more deliverables, the more stuff you have to create, obviously the more work it'll be. We're talking about people, we're talking about time, we're talking about expenses. Those things will scale. If you have one video with one objective, that's a very different scope than a years-long project with several hundred videos, maybe hundreds of assets across different channels. Maybe there's some animated posts, some shorts, some clips, some videos, several graphics packages for your live action stuff. Like there's a whole slew of things that we can create.
Would you like to add fries to that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Who
I
wouldn't?
would.
Yeah.
Truffle fries? Absolutely. Another big bucket is production timeline. So the schedule somewhat determines cost based on the classic supply and demand rules, right? So in a way, you're fighting for priority of the project. So especially in a studio environment where there's multiple projects going on at once, typically there will be rush charges if you have to bump someone off or if you're trying to take priority over someone else's time. So there's some demand side costs there that you might not see coming. If you wanted this project yesterday, it is assumed that you're willing to pay for yesterday for a time machine to get there.
Sure.
Another last bucket here is location and overhead. Is the company you're working with remote, or is it in the penthouse suite of Times Square? Right. So this is becoming less relevant as people are moving away from big cities, moving into more rural areas, working from home. A big disturbance in the force there. But, so they might keep pricing high depending on their value that they see, regardless of their cost of where they are. So, but neither work environment is better or worse than the other. It's just how you are, the position that you're in. Different costs based on how the studio is set up, basically.
Right. So, right now we're remote.
We are.
But in the future, I would like to propose that our studio is in the cloud. So
I'm sorry?
Yeah. So it's
in
like
the cloud.
The cloud.
I see.
So it's in the cloud, but it's actually like 15 to 30,000 feet up in the air in the clouds. That's where the future of technology and workplace environments will go.
How does climate change factor into that? Like, are we moving with the currents?
Right. I don't know.
It's going to seriously alter our delivery schedule.
There's going to be a lot going on there. There's going to be a lot of aerial yoga.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm,
Nice.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. So let me get into some other questions to consider here.
Yeah.
So another big question is, what should I actually be looking for in an estimate, a bid, or a quote?
Yeah. What are some concrete things we can look at?
Yeah. And keeping in mind those words can all mean the same thing. So just
estimate, quote, bid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the goal of the estimate or quote or bid is to be able to do a bit of comparison shopping between them, right? And while we can't tell you how to actually compare, we can guide you in what we as creatives believe is relevant to the value of the production overall. So here's what we think you should look for. The first is scope and schedule summary. The studio should provide you with some kind of summary of your goals for the project and the estimated time to completion. That way, everyone is on the same page about what to expect. It's also the studio's job to factor in feedback and revision time into their estimated total that's required to finish the project. So there's no extra surprises later.
Yeah.
Because you never wanted to run into that. A second thing to look out for is the animation style we were talking a little bit about earlier. In the estimate, you should expect to see some kind of breakdown of style. They'll likely show you a lot of their own work to convince you that they can do the task that's required. But you should look deeper into seeing if they've described their workflow or their style in any particular way. What's their approach to that style? If a company doesn't have examples of any specific styles, they might actually instead show references from other animation studios or different places, or other videos that they've seen that closely resemble what you're looking for. Because there are times where studios can do the work, but maybe they just haven't been given that opportunity yet. So, it comes with its own set of risk there. Another thing to consider here is resources. These are asking the question like, what specific tools or software or resources are required to complete any of the work on your piece? And an even bigger question here is, who is actually responsible for paying for that? Right? An example here is like when we work with clients, we often find that if they require us to work with something like stock footage, then we have to take that cost into account in our estimate because stock can get very expensive very quickly.
Depends on how big the project is. Yeah. But yeah. Getty Images is making bank.
Yeah. So we might also, on top of that, need to actually develop new tools and different tech to complete that project in the way you're asking for it. So that might incur some charges as well. And ultimately, the idea here is that a summary of all of those resources should be included in the estimate. You should be able to see that somewhere.
Yeah. So speaking of resources, maybe a compromise is to have someone buy the Frisbees, and maybe someone else buys like the disc golf set, like the actual.
Oh, so instead of incurring the whole cost on one side,
we split it.
You split the cost.
We split the cost.
Yeah, teamwork.
Trying to get to that disc golf net.
Right. We're gonna have some kind of sporting thing soon.
Yeah, we picked disc golf.
Right.
Not
the coolest of all sports.
Or football. We're in Massachusetts. Come on. Okay. Last two things to look for here inside of an estimate or a bid or a quote or whatever you want to call it. Obviously, the cost breakdown. Yep. So the biggest question we get is like, where's my money going? Right? What am I paying for? Cost breakdown will show you how your dollars get allocated to different parts of the production. And sometimes it'll show you a specific stage. Other times it'll show you specific steps within that stage, depending on what needs to happen. So it's a great opportunity to learn and ask about the workflow at that time. If a studio doesn't have the breakdown of costs, that's a really big red flag. Oh.
Prop comedy will live forever.
Wow.
I have made a flag for
a big
our
red
audio
flag.
listeners.
That's a decent flag.
It's good. Anytime we have a red flag now, I'm gonna wave our flag. Yes.
Wow. Eventually, we're going to have a ton of props on the show.
Perfect.
For audio listeners, she's waving a big red flag.
Yes.
Made out of, what did you make that out
of? A manila folder.
A red manila folder. Nice.
I guess manila's yellow. It was just a red folder.
You ruined a red folder. A perfectly good folder to make a flag. Nice. Good for you. The last bucket here is revisions and changes. While it might take a team a single day to work on, say, a storyboard or something like that, that doesn't typically include the extra time needed to make changes or revisions on your feedback based on that. So revisions are always handled sort of differently across studios. I'm not sure how people do it. Some factor it as an overall percentage of time. Some limit the number of revisions. Some schedule out a certain number of hours. Some do unlimited revisions. I've seen that in different places. Their approach should be included in the estimate, so they're not surprising you with just any additional costs, right?
Yeah.
I think for as many people who like surprises, there's an equal number of people who hate surprises.
That's true. That's fair.
So that's it. Hopefully this episode gave you a better way to look at estimates and just be prepared for thinking about that stuff.
Yeah, that way you're not overwhelmed by the process there.
Yeah, so let's get into the tease.
In the next episode, we're dropping another hack. So we'll go over some quick questions to avoid when asking for an estimate, which is actually really, really helpful.
Practicing some active avoidance. I think that's important.
That's fair.
A big thank you to EMedia for producing this podcast. Our
As always.
Producer is Jackson Foote. Our music was created by Hidden and licensed through premiumbeat.com. And until next time,
Stay honest.
Stay creative.
Stay open.
Thank you so much for listening. You could have spent this time with anyone else, and we really appreciate you being here with us.
Yeah, see you in the next episode.
Yeah. Audio listeners, stick around for a bad idea.